Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here to talk about hardware. Lots of people are talking about hardware at the moment. It's a topic that is, it's actually on fire at the moment, as we say, in our business. Here are some of the companies that you will be familiar with. A couple of years ago, you wouldn't have seen such big exits for hardware startups. When you look here at three great examples in recent times that have been phenomenal exits. And again, when we look at the startups in this space, you also have some of the other companies like Amazon announcing their phone only last week, and also Google with the Glass. So lots of people are getting into this space, okay? And again, when we look at some of the companies like GoPro yesterday, went public yesterday. Their share price was up 30% yesterday, and today it's up another 15%. You also have companies like Jawbone, a great company like Jawbone and Square, also leveraging hardware to actually deliver a great software solution. And again, these are companies that are still, you know, as I say, with GoPro going public, this is a big milestone for somebody in the hardware space. As investors, when you're looking at a software or a software company, you go through the same, or with hardware, you go through the very same steps as you will with software. There's nothing different. You have to look for phenomenal entrepreneurs. You have to ensure that they build great teams. You will have the same complexities in the hardware as in software. In some cases, you will have some more. But there are ways now that you can actually overcome some of those challenges and complexities. But what I want to say here is, you know, you're great investors. You're all investing here in the Valley. Stick to the basic principles that you do for software. Jules' presentation last is very applicable to hardware as it is to software. And that's one of the first things we always say to companies. One of the things that's easier today, you know, I spent 10 years before in the past, I spent 10 years in the retail industry, in the fashion industry, and it was interesting, in the fashion industry, I could go to a fabric mill and I could buy raw materials, and I could take that to a contract manufacturer, and I could make any product from that I wanted in the fashion industry. I could buy 60 meters of fabric and convert it into suits or into shirts, didn't matter. This hasn't been the same when it comes to hardware and technology. The fabrics of technology have not been available to make products like it has been in other industries. That's changing because now you have Arduino, you've got Raspberry Pi, you have Edison coming from Intel, you also have 3D printing, and you have software tools like open source, like Linux, you also have Android. These help startups go into a garage for a weekend. We recently had a hackathon over at our facility in Potrero where so many teams came in, and over a weekend they came up with samples, products, prototypes, using all of these tools. That's what we call a minimum viable prototype, okay? Wasn't available in the past. You can do it today. Really important. And I did say prototype, not product. This is one of the most important things. As you look at investing in a hardware startup, one of the things that really scares a lot of investors is the inventory. Now, if you look at inventory, you know, we always said that inventory is evil. It's much better to be looking for it than looking at it. But here's an analogy that we use a lot. It takes less than 6 hours to send a package to the International Space Center. Now, lots of big retailers and big distributors of products will tell you, no problem, we'll give you a purchase order for your product, but you have to put it into our distribution center. And some of these companies have up to 30 or 40 distribution centers just in the United States alone. Now, you think about it, they'll ask you to put 2 weeks of inventory. 2 weeks of inventory sitting in 40 warehouses, that's 80 weeks of inventory. That's a lot of inventory, and that's huge risk. So we use this analogy quite a lot because we talk about our fulfillment center being 3 hours. We're 3 hours from all of the factories that we work with. And we're 3 days from 90% of the consumers on the planet that actually use and buy these products. The other 10% will actually wait a couple of days extra for it. But this is really important because as you add warehouses and distribution centers, you actually add risk. You add inventory, okay? And for startups, interesting, A lot of the startups will come to me and they'll tell me, oh, we can't afford air freight. And I actually tell them very quickly, actually, you can't afford sea freight because the working capital required tied up in the chain is way too much risk. One of the other things that's a huge challenge is that expectations now are much higher than before, and it's because of great devices like this. So everyone expects when you make a piece of hardware today that when you take it out of that box, that the user experience, the out-of-box experience is phenomenal, and that when you turn it on, it works. And it has to be a great experience. And if you're a startup and you're playing in the hardware space, you do not get a second chance. Your out-of-box experience, that whole end-to-end has got to be phenomenal. And this is because of the expectations that has been set by some of the great companies in the space. Also, the entire environment around how a consumer interacts with your device or your product, the first experience is hugely important. We use this when we interact with clients. One of the things that we always talk about is that we talk about working with companies that are passionate about design, they're passionate about their brand, and they're passionate about the consumer experience. Only then can they differentiate. And for us, you know, a lot of the big companies we work with, they think about the experience economy. We live and work in an experience economy. People want to buy great experiences. And if they're going to pay you a premium for a product, that experience has got to be great. And to manage that experience, you need to know every step in the process. When we look at our process, whether it's how it comes off a production line, how it's packaged, to how it arrives into somebody's hands, whether it's in a store or whether it's direct to a consumer's home. That experience has got to be, the attention to detail has got to be fantastic, because that's what the big guys are doing. Startups have got to be the same. One of the things that we focus on as well is unique content. So in our world, we make sure, whether it's through our online store, the Blueprint, that the content that you see there, more and more you will see that will be the exclusive place where you can actually get the early products that we will launch. So unique content is also critical. Now, another phenomenon recently is crowdfunding. And again, crowdfunding is a phenomenal tool, and it's a great tool if it's used well. A lot of companies in the last couple of years have used it, and one of the things, the downsides of it, is that they set expectations too high because they actually will use it to get their initial money. Sometimes you're better off to be closer to your launch of product. You know, go back a year, 2 years ago, and where some companies were taking over a year to develop a product. That's not a good experience. So it's great to use the crowdfunding when you're close to delivering your product. A lot of the companies that go through our incubator, we're very, very focused on helping them make sure that they're almost ready for production when they start their crowdfunding. Again, one of the things that making hardware easier at the moment is that there's a phenomenal amount of great accelerators and incubators out there. Limitless Labs here in San Francisco, Accelerator, RGA Techstars is another great one. We also have our own one, Highway 1, over in the Mission. We've put 23 companies through this on 2 programs in the last year. When we look at the way these companies have actually advanced and developed, and the attention they're getting is phenomenal. When we bring them through Demo Day, the excitement around the hardware is, we're seeing something that's completely, we hadn't seen before. And one of the things I would say to any of you investing, it is a big advantage if some of the companies have gone through any one of these programs. Again, when we look at our program is a 4-month program, which includes 2 weeks on the ground in China. Some of the other programs are resident in China, but these programs are very helpful. We also take companies at PCH, we take companies through our access program, we take them right through, even if they come from the other programs, we'll take them through and we'll help them to scale as well. The other great thing at the moment is that great software entrepreneurs and engineers are taking serious looks at hardware. This, for us, is really exciting. One thing that I've noticed over the last year is that the amount of people getting involved, and the smart people are really getting involved. For us, this is hugely exciting. The The other thing that's great at the moment is the minimum viable prototype. Again, if you're looking at investing in any of these companies, just make sure they can show you a prototype, because it's one thing to talk about and show you sketches, but actually when they go through the development of a prototype, there are so many lessons that they learn, there's so many mistakes that they'll make. Only then will they be able to really articulate, even if they are experienced engineers, once they actually develop a prototype, and it doesn't need to look good, but once it has to function, and you have to be comfortable with that. Here's a great example of a company. This company just went through our Highway 1 program. They actually were at our demo day last week. It's called Q. And they've been hugely successful in actually just attracting investment in the last couple of weeks. One of the things that I think that really differentiate this company, two great entrepreneurs, but their design. They invested in design. They brought in a great design firm very early on, which we recommended that they did. But you can see here the out-of-box experience, the actual design, the thought that went into the product. This is as good as any of the big companies. And actually, when you see the product in your hand, it's actually really great. And all of the companies now that go through our program, they all involve design very early on. It's medical diagnostics, home diagnostics. So again, hardware, making stuff is still hard, but the risks are getting less, okay? So, and that's, for us, is one of the things that's really encouraging. We've been operating out of Silicon Valley since we started. Our first customers were here in the Valley. But we've been in business 19 years. Probably around 2007, 2008, we started talking to investors. And very few investors actually were interested in hardware because it was a high-risk space back then. There were very few people like Tim Chang who I'd meet who could finish my sentences. So Tim has been a big supporter, and I think that there are people here in the Valley that understand investing in hardware, and it is definitely worth looking at now for sure. I'm happy to take any questions. I have a few minutes. So, any questions?
What other good examples can you give of good hardware startups?
Good hardware startups. There's a great one here in San Francisco called Lively. It's a home monitoring device for single parents, for elderly parents. This one has been, because it's a great use of both software and hardware. That's here in San Francisco. Little Bits in New York is a phenomenal one. Again, great entrepreneurs. And again, we've worked with these throughout the process and really helped them scale. Adaptix is one that's come through Highway 1 in the last year. Ringley is another one in New York that I think you're going to see quite a bit about in the future. Navdi is another one that's going to do crowdfunding very soon. These last three have gone through our first Highway 1 program.
When startups should go to China with their production or prototyping, should they start up over here or should they go as quickly as possible?
That's a great question. You know, when we look at startups and the way the industry is changing, if you go back to when we started, say, with Little Bits, about 2 years ago, they had 4 people in that company, or 5 people in the company. They couldn't scale. Great entrepreneur. We actually took them to China straight away. We started to build their prototypes and their production in China. What happened is they then went out and they attracted great investment. Once they had the investment, they started actually, they started hiring people. Today they're at 45 people. Now you have 45 people that stay in an office 1 hour extra in New York at night. And what happens is that it drives more expectations. They want things faster. They want their samples faster. Then they start to prototype here. But I think in the early stage, for us, we've opened the facility here in Potrero where we actually prototype. But for startups, they need to have a good understanding of on the ground in China, how they're going to scale their product. So it's okay to do your early prototype, your minimum viable prototype here, but then once you're actually talking about mass production, and when you're an investor, you need to make sure that they have knowledge of how to do it in China, whether it's through a company like us or somebody else, or they've been there themselves. But I would think that once they have a sample or prototype first, Then you need to know what it's going to take to make 1 million of those.
Sorry, I think it's quite easy now to get a prototype out there. What do you think is usually the next step? Because sometimes you would expect that you need a very large batch to be able to produce it there, but most of the times you're not ready to sell that much, right? So what do you think happens there in between?
This is where the crowdfunding is a great tool. So using crowdfunding at the right time, once you know, but again, you want to capture the consumer's imagination and you want to meet their expectations. So you really want to surprise them. Another very good startup we worked with was is Blaze, which is a bicycle light with a laser beam on it. This is a very popular one. It started in the UK. It was a 5-person startup. 8 people, and in 8 months, with $500,000, shipped the product. So you've got to get the product into consumers' hands as early as possible from once you actually create the hype and the buzz about the product. So, and again, it's easier now to create small runs. In the past, unless you had big runs of product, big volume, you wouldn't get attention. Now you will get attention. Yep.
Any insights that you can share on valuations for the hardware companies that obviously aren't going through the crowdfunding route, but the traditional VC route, maybe like what valuations are you seeing at demo days? And what should investors keep in mind when valuing hardware companies? Anything to look out for given sort of some of the differences between software companies?
Okay, great. Again, as I said earlier, using your same basic principles as you do in software is really important. Again, with the hardware, if you look at the hardware companies that have exited recently, a lot of those have been relatively short and they've actually got very high valuations. The risk period is at the one before they start to ship product. So you need to make sure, like if you can get in early, because once they ship a product and the product is out in the consumer's hands, that's when the valuations will go up. So I think once the products are shipping, and this is one of the things that a lot of the startups come to us, they want to get their products into consumers' hands because that's where the valuations will go up.
For hardware startups, manufacturing really matters, but design really matters. In these stages of relay, computer, these kind of things, they really design matters. So how to help this kind of startup, hardware startup entrepreneurs to get some kind of inspiration from this kind of design firm or from some kind of the fashion designers and these kind of things? Because Shenzhen really matters, but London, New York City, Milan, Tokyo still really matters.
Yes, great. For us, the design is a really important component. And for our startups that go through Highway 1, a lot of them, when they'll come here to San Francisco, we introduce them to all of the top design firms, Ammunition, Astro, Fuse, and these are all great design firms. They're all here in San Francisco. They've all worked in hardware companies with the big corporates, but they're also very willing to work with startups. They're actually excited to work with startups. Our work actually, you go back a couple of years ago, when we started to interact with hardware startups, for us, what was exciting was that the demands and the expectations of the startups were phenomenal. And you will find that now design firms are very willing to work with hardware startups. Think we're done? Thank you.